All right, welcome to week 3, unit 3 of our Paraeducator training course, workplace readiness training class. And today we're going to be talking about, or we're going to be well on our way to talking about language and cognition. This is part 1 of 3 parts of unit 3 from our OER textbook. By the end of unit 3, these are the learning outcomes that are desired. You should be able to explain the Piagetian concepts of schema, assimilation, and accommodation. We'll talk about all of those today. In the future, we'll talk about the 6 sub-stages of sensory motor intelligence. You should be able to describe those in the future. Describe the characteristics of infant memory. Describe components and developmental progression of language, very important. And identify and compare the theories of language. So, we're going to be talking about some of the star players, as it were, in child development thought, human development thought. If you've ever seen a child grow up, then they start out crawling, and before too long, they're on 2 feet. But between being someone who just crawls and someone who is running everywhere, there's a type of locomotion called cruising. And that's what this boy is doing. He's got his hand on a railing. So cruising is a type of locomotion that involves, support from something else. It's kind of like having an additional leg, right? So how do we get there? Motor development. All right. This is my baby boy here. And you can see a year and a half ago, he was sort of barely able to sit up next to the pumpkin and make duck lip face. And now he's what they call a runner, just running everywhere, climbing in and out of boxes and all kinds of stuff. He's got teeth now. So we're talking about motor development. In infants, it always happens in a sequence. We'll talk about exactly what that sequence is. But kids move, this is the process whereby kids move from purely reflexive actions to more advanced motor functioning. So from grosser motor skills, the broader context, to more fine motor skills. And we talk about this in our other course too, in this program. So we said that development moves in an orderly progress, specific progression. And development moves along certain lines of the body as well. So cephalocaudal, cephalus is the head, and caudus or caudal is the adjective having to do with the back. So that is from head to tail. So we're starting, most of the development is starting here. This is the mammal survival strategy. We have few young, and we take very good care of them, right? And when a baby comes out of its mother, its skull is not ossified. It's very, what's the right word? Plastic, sort of. It can move a bit with a good reason. And so that's kind of the first thing that starts to develop a lot in a lot of mammals, including us. And also development happens proximo-distally. So from the center outward, like so. You could say midline outward. Okay, we'll be talking for a moment about sensory capacities of developing children. For a long time in our history, in the history of science, people thought that newborns had very little sensory ability. If you do sort of a number of at-home type of tests, like dangling something like keys or something like that in front of an infant, they may not appear to be focusing on the keys. They might appear to be interested, but maybe they're not. You're not convinced that they're focusing on them. In the last 100 years or so, there's been a lot more sort of laboratory research with controlled conditions that has revealed that infants do have sensory ability. Current research techniques have demonstrated just how developed the newborn is, with especially organized sensory and perceptual abilities. Look at that fluffy carpet. It looks like the kid is filling the fluffy carpet there. Let's talk about vision. So this is one of the senses that's not so developed when we are born, because of course inside our mothers there's no light, right? There's no reason to open our eyes. until we come out. When babies are born, their vision is not highly developed, but it develops quickly. The fovea in our eyes, well, you could say foveolus, fovea, the central field of vision in the retina, which allows us to see sharp details. So we're probably seeing a pattern already with gross motor skills moving to finer motor skills. The eye kind of panoptically focusing on lots of things and then drilling down to be able to see finer details, right? This reaches adult levels of development at about 15 months. So it doesn't take that long, for your eyes to fully develop. Later, we get binocular vision, which it sounds like it's limiting, but it's actually not. This is the type of vision that requires input from two eyes. People who only have one eye, lost it in an accident or at birth, something like that, they don't see depth, right? So everything is closer to two-dimensional for them. If you put your hand over your eye, you can test that anytime, right? Binocular vision allows us to see depth. This develops in about 3 to 6 months. Okay, how about hearing? We listen to our parents talking the whole time we're in the womb. Hearing is very keenly developed at point of birth. The laboratory research has revealed that infants can distinguish between very similar sounds just 1 month after birth. And they can also tell the difference between a familiar and unfamiliar voice even earlier than that, maybe a week or two. What about touch and pain? They're closely related, right? At birth, these are very keenly related, keenly developed already. It's another part of the mammalian survival strategy. Even babies will try to move away from fire, right? That kind of thing. Infants have cardiovascular responses to pain. This is how we can be certain that they feel it. Babies cry about everything. You're happy, you cry. You're hungry, you cry. You need change, you cry. But experiments have shown that there can be, for instance, there have been experiments where newborns receive surgeries without anesthesia and then with anesthesia, and their reactions are quite different, as you might expect. Usually cardiovascular, the amount of oxygen in their blood, changes with the pain response. So we can close the books on that one. Okay, how about taste and smell? These two are very closely related, right? If you hold your nose and eat something, it tastes different. Taste and smell studies have shown that babies have innate preferences. That is, things that they prefer from the beginning. And that newborns tend to prefer sweet flavors. It's probably not a surprise. Okay, so we've been talking about these different senses. But infants are born, they sort of hit the ground running. They're born with the ability to perceive the world in an intermodal way. So, any science term that starts with inter means between, right? And mode is way, essentially. In other words, they process input from more than one sensory modality at a time, right? Just like an adult would do. So all of this is to say that we are born with a certain amount of sensory development already on the books. Okay, let's talk about Jean Piaget. He was one of the foundational thinkers in terms of modern educational theory. He's contributed to linguistics, he's contributed to psychology, lots of different things. In the 20th century, I think there was only one psychologist quoted more than him, and that was B.F. Skinner. We'll talk about Skinner probably next week. But he died in 1980. He was Swiss. He was a psychologist, and he's mostly known for child development work and epistemological view. His theories of cognition and this view are together called genetic epistemology. Now, in the other course in our program, I talk about epistemology. So in this one, I'll let it suffice to say that epistemology is the making of meaning. It's meaning making. Every activity that humans do is related to epistemology. So it's pretty broad, right? We're constantly making meaning. Why did something happen? Right? We have to know why something happened all the time. Okay, so genetic epistemology would be sort of trying to reveal the meaning behind certain traits in humans. In educational theory, we have different perspectives on intelligence. Piaget was one of the first folks to not view intelligence just as knowledge or facts. So when we're, as paraeducators, when we are teaching kids, these days, we don't just think of them as these sort of empty vessels to be filled with knowledge, right? They're not empty. It's more like they are pretty close to full already, and we just want them to overflow, right? So intelligence itself is something that Piaget viewed as a process, not a destination, but it's the process, how we respond to the stimuli in our environments. So does this mean that there is greater intelligence in adults than in children? Some people might say yes, but differences between adult and child intelligences don't come from the children knowing fewer things. It's just that they think in different ways than adults do. We're going to talk now about some of the ways in which we change our thinking when we're babies moving on to being toddlers. Okay, I mentioned we would talk about schema, assimilation, and accommodation. Piaget was focused on universal physical properties of environments. So things that can be found anywhere, India, Canada, Japan, whatever. Time, space, causality, right? Those are all found in all of those places, of course. And those are things that we investigate. All humans do. Causality, that's connected to epistemology, right? What caused this? If I do this, what will happen? Constantly experimenting with the world around us. And we are relating to the progression of time and our physical location in space. All right, so in a Piagetian view of the world, infants and children are constructing models of how the world works. In fact, Piaget was, I don't know if he's considered the main architect, but was instrumental in the constructivist movement for exactly this reason. The models that children are constructing are partial and incomplete. There are parts of them they're incorrect. As humans, we tend to generalize and overgeneralize, which leads to overgeneration. And then we learn that there are exceptions to everything. Piaget calls these models schema. Sometimes they're called schemata, but those are both plural. And you can say a schema for one, right, or two schema, but I usually say schemata. Children develop their schemata through assimilation and through accommodation. So let's talk about the first one first. Assimilation is fitting the new information into an existing schema. So you're adding onto a schema with new input. You're not changing the schema. Here's an example of assimilation. Child will call all animals with four legs doggy because they have the concept of doggy. So it's kind of that the schema is everything that walks with four legs is called doggy. We have to find out later that there are different categories of these beings, these life forms. Accommodation is very different from assimilation because it's about expanding the framework of knowledge to deal with a new situation, right? Kid says, "Oh, it's a doggy." And mommy says, "No, it's a zebra." We have to figure out what the frame is. What is the frame of reference? Okay? And it's not, when we're 2 years old, we're not taking a college class and using big words, right? This is all happening behind the scenes. Here's an example of accommodation. Recognizing that a horse is different from a zebra. I mean, they look pretty similar, don't they? This means that a person has accommodated and has schemata for both horses and zebras. So now we're not calling them doggies. We're not calling them all horses, even though their category is very similar. This is accommodation. So in Piagetian thought, organization is when we combine existing schemata into new and more complex ones. I have the graphic of the happy little sea creatures being combined. By connecting schemata together, we can grow and refine our knowledge structures. This word is always hard for me to pronounce. Here we go. Disequilibration. There we go. Piagetian disequilibration is when we detect discrepancies or contradictions between the models we are constructing and the experiences we are having in our interactions with the world. Okay, so we can often hear children re-evaluate their own models of the world epistemologically, right? By saying, "Oh, I see. So there are some things that look like horses, but they have a different color and they behave differently." Right? Recognizing contradictions, recognizing exceptions, realizing that they don't already understand everything. Disequilibration. But equilibration is when we get frustrated from disequilibration and we readjust our actions and models so they're in better alignment. So this is kind of the analog of accommodation, right? Whereas disequilibration is linked to assimilation. Okay, let's talk about cognitive development. We're on our way to talking about linguistic development. That will be in the next presentation. I think Piaget was the first to say that infants are not unintelligent. Instead, they are busily constructing their own understandings of the world through interacting with their environment, constantly experimenting with things. If I touch this glass, will it fall over? If it falls over, is that bad? All that kind of thing that they do without language at first. Piaget proposed different stages of cognitive development. The first one is called the sensory motor stage. We will go through all of the stages, but not in the current lecture. So broadly, there are 4 major stages of cognitive development. The sensory motor, which goes from birth to 2 years, that's what we're concerned with at this time. The pre-operational, 2 to 7 years, concrete operational, 7 to 12 years, and the formal operational, 12 years and onward. We're going to drill down on each of these and expand on them in the near future. All right. If you have made it this far, thank you for staying with me.